Hey guys, this is my mostly spoiler-free review of Mind Games by Kiersten White. I say mostly spoiler-free only because there is almost no information given about this story on the back or even on the front flap of the book. And so any kind of information I give about these characters is going to be a hair spoilery. I'm keeping most of it um, quiet, but at the same time, I did want to let you know that I am going to give away just a little bit, things that are in the very first part of the story anyway. But if you want to go in completely blind, you should probably not watch this review. So, this book is the first book in a duology. And in this book, we follow two sisters, Sophia or Fia, and Annabelle or Annie. And when we meet them, they are at a special boarding school. And we find out that these two girls have special abilities. Annie can see the future, and Fia has perfect instincts. Basically, when given a choice, if she follows her instincts, she will always choose the best thing. And of course, this school is exploiting them. And that's the basic summary of this book. There are a couple things that I wanted to talk about, mostly the world building, the plot, the writing and the structure of this story, and then the characters and the character development. And let's start with world building. The world building in this is very minimal. I mean, there just really wasn't given almost anything unless it related directly to Annie or Fia and their progressing their story. And it was just very, very minimal. Obviously, with these kinds of abilities, that is a very fantastical element for this story. And we're just never even given an explanation as to how or why, or even how the school found them. I mean, there is a nod to the science aspect that somebody at least is trying to figure it out. We meet a guy who is researching and doing brain scans of these special females who have extra abilities. But other than that, we're never given a why or a wherefore or anything. We don't know all that much about the school that they're at, except it's terrible because it's exploiting these girls, the two girls at least, and that's really it. I do think that in some ways that was very much a missed opportunity. This is a really interesting kind of setup, and yes, it's been done before, but I think that there's so much that can be said with this kind of setup that I really kind of wish she had done more, given us some reason as to why these girls have these special abilities. Let's talk about the school that they're at and give us any kind of but there really wasn't. I don't I would have liked more, but I can't actually be all that mad at the author for this for reasons I will get to a little bit later. I understand why she did it, and I don't disagree with the decision, essentially. But I'll get into that in a little bit. As for the plot, you should know that this is a very short book. It is only about 250 pages, I want to say. The second one is about the same length. And really, this duology, I mean, this is not an amazing standalone book. It is very much a setup for this second book. In this book, what we're really doing is finding out about the girls' history and how they came to be at this school, why this school is so bad, and why it's so difficult for them to escape. I mean, mainly that if you have, obviously Annie can see the future, but there are also people who can't. There are other people who can see the future. There are people who can read your emotions. There are people who can read your thoughts. And when you live in that kind of a place, it's really difficult to make plans or escape or anything like that. So we're really diving into like basically how we got here and why it's so difficult for these girls to get out of this space. But that's a fine storyline. It's not amazing. It's not an amazing storyline. I wouldn't even say it's a solid storyline. It's an okay kind of storyline. Um, and and so it's really a setup for the second book where obviously they're going to be trying to get themselves into a better situation where they're no longer being exploited by this school. Um, So I will say that I think that this would have been better served as if the author had actually put these two books together into one volume and having it be part one and part two, because I assume that the second book is going to be, this is obviously, this is a setup to the escape or whatever they're going to do in the second book. And so they don't, like I said, it doesn't really stand alone. And I just think it would have been better served having been put together as one book. And I think that if you go into this and read this as like part one and then book two is part two, you'll be much, much better than going in thinking that this is going to be an excellent standalone, because it just isn't. I do like the storyline. I do like everything we found out. I do like, I liked this book, but I do recognize that it does not stand on its own very well. One thing that I did find incredibly interesting is that there is really nothing extra in this book. There are no extra details. There's no extra world building. There's no extra scenes, no extra characters or development or anything. Everything, absolutely everything in this serves the purpose of helping us understand where these girls were before they came to the school, where they are now, and why it's bad and why it's so hard to get out. Everything serves a purpose. It is very lean. And actually, like, that's really different than a lot of books that I've ever read. And because, I read a lot of fantasy, I read some science fiction, I just read a lot of these kind of books that give you, extra details or descriptions or scenes that are like, okay, they help progress the storyline or character development or something, but they're not really necessary. And I found that everything in this book was necessary. And I thought that that was incredibly interesting. And that's why I'm not terribly mad about the world building. Like, I would have liked more, but I understand what she was doing, where it was like there is nothing extra. And if she had added in world building, I don't know how she could have done it without it feeling like something extraneous. And so, but I did really, really like that aspect of it. And then for the structure and plot line of this book, or I'm sorry, structure and the writing style, you should know that we do switch between the two characters of Fia and Annie, their perspectives, as well as we switch between present day and past. And I thought that that was very interesting. It gave a little bit more context. We were finding, like, we met Fia and we're like, oh, Fia's a kind of weird person. But then we see her in the past and we're like, okay, but she didn't used to be weird. So what happened? And we find out what happened through those scenes from the past. And I thought that that was actually an excellent way to do this. I think that Kiersten White chose the scenes very, very well. I think she just did a really good job of showing us the progression of this character and the progression of this situation. I also thought that it was an excellent choice to do this because we are inside Fia and Annie's heads, and how in present day Fia is very unusual in how she thinks. She speaks generally how she speaks is normal-ish, but how she's thinking is very different. And we kind of find out that there's a reason for that. And I thought that that was really cool. But it is sometimes a little bit hard to read Fia's thoughts. It's just an unusual kind of writing style. And I think that if I had that all the time, I would have been really annoyed. But because it was broken up by switching perspectives to Annie or switching to the past where she didn't have these kind of tics, it made it a lot easier to deal with, because I knew that the chapters weren't that long and I wasn't going to have to deal with this particular writing style for all that long. And so it just it broke it up in a way that I think makes it a lot easier to read. I do think that there will be those that don't particularly like this style of writing, but I do think that because it's broken up, most people should be able to deal with it. And I don't think anybody's really going to hate it. Um, and then on to for the characters and the character development. Now, I describe this as a book about two sisters, and that's not wholly accurate if we're going based off of character development. It is a story about Fia and her sister and how her sister relates to Fia. Fia is our main character, and Annie just happens to be a really strong secondary character. Because this, like I said, there was nothing extra about this kind of book and how it was written, and that includes character development and characters. There are no extra characters really, and so a lot of books are a lot of characters are kind of one-dimensional, two-dimensional, whatever. They don't have a lot going for them. It's like the guard who guards Annie, and like he's just there to be an impediment to Annie. We don't know anything about him. It doesn't honestly matter. So there was no time spent building up this character. We spend the most time with Fia, and I do think Fia's development is very interesting. Like I said, I thought it was very interesting to watch how we got from the person in the past before, this they were at this school to where we are now, to the person at the end of the book. I thought it was incredibly interesting. I didn't love Annie. And it wasn't that I actively hated her. I just didn't care about her. Like, she was just kind of a character to, be push Fia on. And that was kind of it. But so if we if you go into this book knowing that Fia is the main character and that Annie is a strong secondary character and everybody else is kind of just there to serve a purpose and there's not a whole lot going on, I think that you'll do a lot better with it. So other than that, there's not much to say about the characters because, like I said, they're just not developed. The only other thing that I wanted to say is that when we do meet Fia, she is very definitely depressed. She has a lot of mental health issues going on, depression and some PTSD and probably some other things, but it's never stated, it's generally not explicitly stated. It is stated that there's something wrong with her, like she's clearly not handling certain events very well, but it's not generally explicitly stated, but it is very clear that that's what's going on. And I just kind of wanted to put that out there. But otherwise, I really liked this book. If I would probably give it, honestly, if I were going based off of just my enjoyment, I would probably give it 4.5 stars. I thought it was just so interesting and how it was done. And I liked the character of Fia, and I liked watching her do this kind of stuff. And I had an idea that this was a book that was not really a standalone going into it. So I mean, my expectations were calibrated pretty well. So I really, really enjoyed this. 4.5 stars. Well, 4.25. Let's call it 4.25. If I had to include all the actual, things that are maybe not so great about it, I'd probably drop it down to 3.75. Solid, good read, and still really enjoyable. And I would still recommend it to you. So that is my review. I am very curious. Has anybody read this? I mean, this is a pretty old book. It was published in 2013. And so I don't know if anybody's read this or even heard about it, but if you've read it, did you like it? Do you hate it? Please come talk to me. Let me know. And yeah, until next time, I I hope you guys have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.